Have you ever been the last one in an office building late at night? So late that the world outside has gone completely quiet, and the only sounds are the hum of the server room and the click of your own keyboard. The air gets heavy in a place like that, thick with the silence of 1,000 empty chairs and darkened monitors. Every shadow seems to stretch a little too far, and the building itself seems to hold its breath, waiting for the sun. This is the kind of story that makes you check your locks twice before going to bed. It's the kind that makes you question the familiar sounds of your own home, the groan of the pipes, the whisper of the air conditioning. It's a story about the quiet places and the things that can fill that quiet if you listen too closely. So, before the story truly begins, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd also love to see where you're all listening from. Post your city and local time in the comments below. It's a small way of reminding ourselves we're not alone in the dark. Now, turn off the lights if you dare. Ignore the noises your house makes in the silence, and let's find out together what truly hides in the darkness. For 3 years, my world was the third floor of the OmniCorp building, from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. I was a data verification specialist, which is a fancy way of saying I stared at spreadsheets until my eyes burned, ensuring that endless strings of numbers and codes were correctly logged. It was the perfect job for an insomniac introvert. No coworkers, no small talk, just the steady, monotonous hum of the building and the glow of my 2 monitors. The third floor was a sprawling sea of gray cubicles, a corporate ghost town that only came to life a few hours after I left. My only companions were the security guard, Frank, who I saw for 2 minutes when I badged in, and the cleaning crew that arrived just as I was packing up. It was a profoundly lonely existence, but I'd convinced myself I liked it that way. The building itself was modern, one of those glass and steel boxes that looked impressive from the highway but felt utterly soulless inside. The air was perpetually recycled, carrying a faint, sterile scent of industrial carpet cleaner and old coffee. The dominant sound was the low, omnipresent drone of the HVAC system. It was a constant companion, a white noise machine that drowned out the silence. On some nights, especially when the wind was high, the building would produce an orchestra of strange noises. Groans from the structure settling, whistles as air was forced through window seals. I learned to ignore them. They were just the sounds of a sleeping giant. The first time I heard it, I dismissed it completely. It was a Tuesday in late October, the kind of night where a cold rain was streaking down the panoramic windows of the conference room. I was deep in a particularly tedious file, my focus absolute. And then beneath the hum of the vents, I heard a sound. It was faint, a low murmur, like a television playing in a distant room. I stopped typing and tilted my head. It was gone as quickly as it came. I shrugged, chalking it up to the building's usual symphony. Some architects say that large, modern ventilation systems in commercial buildings can sometimes carry sound in bizarre ways, a phenomenon they call crosstalk. A conversation on the first floor could, in theory, travel up the ducts and emerge as a faint whisper on the 5th. I figured it was just that. Maybe Frank was watching a movie at his security desk downstairs. A week passed. The memory of the sound had all but faded, buried under mountains of data entry. I was on my way back from the break room, cheap, bitter coffee in hand, walking down the main corridor that bisected the cubicle farm. The motion-activated lights flickered on ahead of me, illuminating the path. As I walked, I passed a long, rectangular vent grate set high on the wall. For some reason, my eyes were drawn to it. The grate was painted the same beige as the wall, but I noticed something odd. The metal around the screw heads was scratched, with small, silvery gouges marring the paint. It looked as if someone had recently tried to pry it open, or perhaps had trouble screwing it back in. I figured it was just a sign of sloppy work from the maintenance crew and thought nothing more of it. Back at my desk, the night wore on. The rain had stopped, and the world outside was still and black. It was around 3 a.m., the absolute deadest point of the night, when I heard it again. This time it was clearer, not words but a definite vocal tone. It was a brief, pleading sound, and it came from the ceiling vent directly above my cubicle. I froze, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I strained my ears, waiting. Nothing but the drone of the HVAC. Was I just tired? I was mainlining caffeine and sleeping at odd hours. It wasn't impossible that my brain was starting to play tricks on me. I stood up on my chair and pressed my ear against the cold metal of the vent cover. All I could hear was rushing air. I felt ridiculous. I was a grown man, spooked by the groans of a building. I tried to get back to work, but my focus was shattered. Every creak of the building, every hum of the server room down the hall now seemed charged with potential. I felt a paranoia I hadn't experienced since I was a child, that irrational fear of the dark. The silence was no longer peaceful, it was watchful. I kept glancing up at the vent, expecting. I don't know what I was expecting, but the feeling of being observed was immense. The rest of the shift was agonizingly slow. I couldn't shake the feeling. I decided that when Frank did his 3:30 a.m. walkthrough, I'd casually ask him if he'd heard anything. But 3:30 came and went, and I never heard the jingle of his keys. He must have done his rounds while I was in the break room. It happened for the third time at 5:50 a.m., 10 minutes before my shift ended. I was logging off, shutting down my programs, going through the familiar end-of-night ritual. The building was at its quietest, the HVAC seeming to take a breath before the daytime cycle kicked in. A whisper snaked out of the vent above me. It was so clear, so close, it felt like someone was standing right behind me. I stopped breathing. It wasn't a random sound. It wasn't a trick of acoustics. It was a voice. And it sounded exactly like me. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just a similar voice. It was a perfect duplicate. The same pitch, the same timbre, the same faint raspiness I get when I'm tired. I spun around in my chair, my heart hammering against my ribs. The office was empty, a cavern of shadows and inert technology. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. A recording, a prank. I fumbled with my phone, checking to see if I'd accidentally recorded myself. Nothing. I checked my computer. Nothing. There was no source for the sound. It was impossible. Leaning back, I stared at the vent, my mind a whirlwind of fear and disbelief. As I sat there, paralyzed in the pre-dawn gloom, the voice came one last time, a desperate, broken whisper that cut through the silence and lodged itself in my soul. Please. I didn't go home. I couldn't. My legs felt like they were filled with cement, and my brain was a static-filled radio, unable to land on a single clear thought. I sat there in my office chair, staring at the inert plastic grill of the vent until the first gray light of dawn began to creep through the windows, chasing the deepest shadows from the corners of the room. The arrival of the cleaning crew, with their rattling carts and cheerful morning chatter, was what finally broke the spell. I grabbed my things, mumbled a greeting I don't remember, and fled the building, not looking back. The entire drive home was a blur. I kept the radio off, terrified of what I might hear in the silence between songs. I got to my apartment, locked the door, and stood in my living room, my heart still pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. A recording, a prank. Who would go to such lengths for such a bizarre, pointless joke? And how could they have gotten a recording of my voice sounding so broken? That day was sleepless. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd hear that single whispered word, please. It echoed in my head, a perfect replica of my own voice, but saturated with a desperation I'd never felt. I tried to rationalize. Auditory pareidolia. It's a real phenomenon where the brain interprets random noise as familiar patterns, like hearing words in the rush of a fan. People have been known to hear entire conversations in white noise. I clung to that explanation like a drowning man to a piece of driftwood. I was just overworked, sleep-deprived, and my mind was filling in the blanks. The building was old enough. Maybe the ductwork was configured in some acoustical freak of nature. My brain, primed by the loneliness and the quiet, had simply latched onto random air currents and sculpted them into something terrifying. It had to be that. But when it was time to go back to work that night, a cold dread settled in the pit of my stomach. Part of me wanted to call in sick, to quit on the spot, but another, more insistent part of me needed to know. I had to know if it would happen again. I had to prove to myself that I was just going crazy. The office was exactly as I'd left it, silent, still, and unnervingly vast. I avoided my own cubicle for the first hour, busying myself with making coffee, organizing files I'd already organized, anything to delay the inevitable. Finally, I forced myself to sit down. I tried to work, but my eyes kept darting up to the vent. The air humming from it felt colder than usual. I was on edge, every fiber of my being attuned to the sounds of the building. For hours there was nothing, just the familiar drone. A sense of relief so profound it almost made me dizzy began to wash over me. It was all in my head. I'd had a waking nightmare, a stress-induced hallucination. I let out a slow breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding, and then a soft sound trickled from the vent, a sound of weeping. It was quiet, muffled, but unmistakable. And it was the sound of my own grief, a sound I hadn't made since my father passed away years ago. My blood turned to ice. This wasn't random noise. This was specific. This was personal. My sanity, my carefully constructed wall of logic, crumbled into dust. Trembling, my throat tight and dry, I leaned back in my chair and whispered to the ceiling. "Who's there?" The weeping stopped instantly. The silence that followed was heavy, expectant. I thought maybe I had imagined it after all, that my own whisper had startled me into thinking there was a response. I was about to turn back to my monitor, to pretend none of this was happening, when the voice came back, clearer than ever. It was shaky, relieved. "You can hear me." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of profound discovery. My heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of my chest. My voice was a strangled croak. Who is this?" "It's me," the voice whispered back, a perfect imitation of my own. "It's us. I'm trapped in here. It's so dark." I pushed my chair back, a choked gasp escaping my lips. I looked around the empty office, at the rows of dark screens and silent phones. "This isn't funny," I said, my voice louder now, trying to project an authority I didn't feel. "Who is this?" "Is this Frank?" "Frank." The voice sounded confused, a perfect mirror of my own tone when I'm trying to place a name. No, not Frank. It's just me, just you. I don't know how I got in here." I remember being at the desk. I remember the screensaver, the one with the blue geometric shapes, and then it was just dark. And walls. I can't move. "Please, you have to get me out." The detail about the screensaver, it was the default on the company's systems. It wasn't a secret, but it was specific. My mind was reeling. I was having a conversation with a voice in a vent that claimed to be me. Was I having a psychotic break? Was this what it felt like to lose your mind? I tried to anchor myself. During my shift, I'd been idly looking up building schematics out of morbid curiosity. I'd read that the space between floors, the plenum, is often a chaotic maze of ductwork, wiring, and structural beams, sometimes with spaces large enough for a person, but completely inaccessible. The thought was horrifying. The next few nights evolved into a surreal, terrifying routine. I would work in silence, and then, in the deepest hours of the morning, the voice would start. It would tell me things, small things. It described the recurring dream I had about missing a final exam. It mentioned the tiny scar above my left eyebrow from when I fell off a swing set as a kid. It knew that I hated the taste of artificial cherry. These weren't things someone could find on my social media. These were things locked inside my own head. Each detail was another key turning in a lock, sealing me inside this shared madness. It never sounded malicious. It only ever sounded scared and desperate. It cried, it begged, it pleaded for release. I was falling apart. I stopped eating. Sleep was a foreign concept. One afternoon, I logged into my work computer remotely from home just to check on a file. As I was browsing the system logs for my terminal, a routine I did out of sheer boredom, I saw something that made my stomach clench. There were login and logout records stamped for 3:15 a.m. and 3:20 a.m. the previous night, a time when I was at my desk, talking to the vent. I hadn't touched the keyboard. It had to be some kind of automated system update, a remote diagnostic. It had to be. But the idea that something had been using my credentials while I was mere feet away filled me with a new, colder kind of fear. Last night the voice was more frantic than ever. I can feel the building, it rasped, the sound thin and reedy. It's waking up. The morning is coming. It gets tight. When the daytime systems come on, the air pushes. It hurts, a sob caught in its throat, my throat. You have to get me out. Tonight, please. I can't take another day in here. How? I whispered, my hands shaking so badly I had to grip the edge of my desk. What do you want me to do? The voice grew quiet, conspiratorial. The security office, it said, the whisper urgent and sharp. Frank keeps a master key ring in the top left drawer of his desk, an old brass key. He thinks nobody knows about it. It opens the maintenance access corridor on the north side of the floor, behind the big metal filing cabinets. You have to move them. There's a panel in the wall. You can open it from there. You can get to me. The voice paused, and when it spoke again, it was filled with a chilling, desperate hope. You can let me out. The thought of breaking into Frank's office, of physically acting on the instructions of a disembodied voice, was a line I hadn't thought I would cross. For days, I'd been a passive participant in my own haunting, a terrified audience member. But now it was demanding I get on stage. The request hung in the air between me and the vent, a tangible, terrifying thing. Did I really believe there was another version of me trapped in the walls? Or was I finally succumbing to a complete and total breakdown, manufacturing a quest to give my paranoia a purpose? I couldn't tell the difference anymore. All I knew was the overwhelming, gut-wrenching pity I felt when I heard that voice, my voice, begging for help. I didn't answer it. I sat in silence for the rest of my shift, the voice's proposal echoing in my mind. The sun rose, the cleaners came, I went home. But this time, something had shifted. The ambiguity was gone, replaced by a dreadful certainty. I had to do something. I couldn't spend another night in that office, listening to myself weep in the darkness above my head. I was either going to prove I was sane by finding nothing, or I was going to confront the impossible. Either way, it had to end. That night, I arrived at work with a plan. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I waited until 1:00 a.m., the time Frank usually took his first long break, heading down to the lobby to watch his small, portable TV. I watched the security camera feed on my computer, a low-resolution, black and white view of his empty desk. Now or never. The security office was at the far end of the floor, near the elevators. The door was locked, but it was a simple lock. I had once seen Frank open it with a credit card when he'd forgotten his keys, a fact my subconscious had conveniently filed away. One of the many strange bits of information you pick up in the lonely quiet of a building at night is how flimsy some security measures really are. My employee ID was a thin, flexible piece of plastic. It took me a full, agonizing minute of fumbling, my hands slick with sweat, but I heard the click of the latch sliding back. I slipped inside, leaving the door ajar. The room was small, dominated by a bank of monitors showing silent, grainy footage of empty hallways. The air smelled of stale coffee and Frank's cinnamon-scented air freshener. I went straight to the desk, top left drawer. It squeaked open, revealing a clutter of pens, paper clips, and old takeout menus. And there, glinting under the dim light, was a ring of keys. One of them was large and brass, just as the voice had described. My hand trembled as I lifted it. The metal was cold and heavy, ancient compared to the electronic key cards we used for everything else. I took the key and crept back to the main office floor. The north wall was lined with huge, gray metal filing cabinets, the kind that probably hadn't been moved since the building was constructed. They were heavy, but I was fueled by adrenaline. Grunting, straining, I managed to slide the first one aside, scraping a long, ugly gash in the linoleum floor. And there it was. A small square metal panel flush with the wall, with a keyhole in the center. It was real. Everything the voice had said was real. A wave of nausea washed over me. This was actually happening. I was about to open a door that shouldn't exist, based on the word of a ghost in the machine. I inserted the brass key. It turned with a loud, grating clunk that seemed to echo through the entire empty building. I pulled and the heavy panel swung outward, revealing a black, cavernous space. The air that poured out was foul. It was thick with the smell of dust, decay, and something else, something metallic and vaguely organic, like old blood. A crawl space. A mess of thick electrical conduits, massive silver ventilation ducts, and plumbing pipes snaked through the darkness. I fumbled for my phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam cut a weak path through the oppressive dark, and then I saw it. About 20 feet in, just past a massive T-junction in the ductwork, was a bundle of what looked like wires. No, not wires. It was clothes, a tattered version of the same shirt and pants I was wearing. They were wrapped around a dark, vaguely human-shaped mass that was wedged between two enormous ducts. I couldn't breathe. My phone slipped from my sweaty grasp, clattering to the floor of the crawl space and plunging me into absolute darkness. Panic seized me. I scrambled for the phone, my fingers brushing against the cold, dusty concrete. I found it, the light flickering back on. I aimed it back at the shape. It was motionless. Was it a body? Had someone died in there? Before I could process the horror, the voice whispered, not from the vent above my desk this time, but from the darkness right in front of me. "You opened it." It was my voice, but it was different now. The desperate, pleading tone was gone. It was flat, cold, and laced with something that sounded terrifyingly like triumph. A new sound started, a slow, rhythmic scraping. Metal on metal. It was coming from deeper within the crawl space, from beyond the crumpled clothes. I backed away from the opening, my heart trying to claw its way out of my throat. What is that?" I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. The voice from the dark chuckled. It was a dry, hollow sound, my chuckle. "That's me," it said. "Thank you." I couldn't get through the panel, but the vents go everywhere. The scraping grew louder, closer. I realized what I was seeing. The crumpled clothes weren't wrapped around a body. They were a decoy, a lure. My gaze followed the sound past the clothes into the deeper darkness. The beam of my phone caught movement. Something was unfolding itself from the shadows, something long and thin, like a limb made of bent metal and wire. It was pulling itself along the pipes, dragging its form forward. It was cobbled together from the guts of the building, parts of the ventilation system, electrical wiring, pieces of rusted metal frame. And at the center of its grotesque mechanical body, glowing with a faint internal light, was a speaker. A simple, round office intercom speaker. From it I heard my own voice, distorted now, synthesized and cruel. "It's so good to finally stretch." I didn't scream. The sound was trapped in my throat, a knot of pure terror. This thing, this construct of wire and metal, it had learned my voice. It had studied me. It had built a psychological prison for me, using my own memories, my own fears, as the bars. The clothes, the stories, the desperation. It was all a lie to get me to open this door. It wasn't trapped. It was just locked out. It continued to drag itself toward the opening, its makeshift limbs scraping and clattering in the suffocating silence. It wasn't a ghost. It was something else entirely. Something born in the wires and the loneliness of the building. A parasitic intelligence that had latched onto the only other consciousness in the quiet dark, me. It had created a perfect puppet of my voice to manipulate me, to make me its key. I scrambled backward, falling over one of the filing cabinets I had moved. I crab-walked away, my eyes locked on the growing darkness in the open panel. The thing was almost at the opening, a horrifying marionette of industrial refuse. I could hear it breathing through the speaker, a sound like static, a sound like rushing air, the sound of the vents. It had been inside the system all along. It had been listening. I scrambled to my feet and ran. I didn't grab my keys, my wallet, or my jacket. I just ran. I burst out of the office floor, sprinted down the emergency stairwell, and didn't stop running until I was out in the cold, pre-dawn air of the street, gasping for breath. The sound of my own voice, twisted and triumphant, echoing in my head. I never went back. I left everything in that office. My job, my belongings, a part of my sanity. I moved out of my apartment the next week and drove halfway across the country, as if physical distance could somehow sever the connection. But it can't. Sometimes, when my new apartment is quiet, I can hear a faint hum from the air conditioning vent. I know it's just the machine, the normal sound of a home breathing around me, but my blood still runs cold. I find myself listening, straining to hear a voice in the rushing air. The police were called, of course. My manager reported that I had abandoned my job and that there had been a break-in at the security office. They questioned Frank, who swore he never kept a spare key in his desk. They found the filing cabinets moved, the long scratch on the floor, and the maintenance panel wide open. They searched the crawl space. They found my phone, but they reported finding nothing else. No body, no clothes, no strange amalgamation of wires and metal, just dust and ductwork. They concluded I'd had some kind of breakdown, a paranoid episode. They said I had vandalized the office and then fled. There's a warrant out for my arrest in that state. I don't know what that thing was or where it went. Did it scuttle back into the veins of that building? Or did it slip out into the world through the door I so foolishly opened? I think about that every night. I wonder if it's still listening somewhere. If it's learning a new voice in a new quiet place, whispering its desperate lies through another vent, trying to convince someone else to let it out. The scariest part is the silence. I can't stand it anymore. I have the TV on constantly, music always playing, because in the moments of true quiet, I still hear it. A single whispered word, not from a vent, but from the back of my own mind. My own voice, laced with cold amusement. Please.